Welcome back to 3 Go Searching. Chapter 2 is called The Ship That Sailed in the Dark. Pirates, said David. Smugglers, said Waffy, who knew more about it. Both boys fell silent and remained hanging over the fisher, peering down into the little boat. David longed for Murray. Murray would have known no more about it than he did, but Murray would have known exactly what to pretend and how to extract the last drop of mystery and thrill and imagined danger out of the situation. But Waffy did not have much imagination, and David felt rather frightened. He glanced up the cliff and hoped his mother was watching him from the window. I think it's nearly dinner time, said David. I think we ought to go home. Perhaps it is just a fishing boat. Waffy shook his cropped head. Smuggling, he said emphatically. They are doing it all the time. My father drives a truck, and the police are stopping them all along the main roads. They caught a man the other day with a load of hay, and they tore it to pieces. Inside were guns going to the frontier. We'll watch that little ship, and remember, don't say anything to anyone. They came back along the crest of the rock on all fours, like crabs, and flung themselves on the sand to rest. The hot September sun beat down on them, but the breeze from the sea was pleasant, and there were all sorts of things to watch. To the right of them, the harbor wall stuck out beyond the headland, and a great American battleship lay anchored in the bay. Far beyond that, they could clearly see the lighthouse against the blue. They burrowed their legs in the sand and tried to make flat pebbles bounce on the surface of the sea until the bell rang at the top of the cliff. It won't take you 15 minutes, said Waffy. Never mind, I want to go now, said David, fastening his sandals. He did not know why, but he felt strangely glad to be climbing up the cliff again. He would have gone straight home over the back fence, but Waffy wanted to take the long way around by the road and to visit the store. He had a few cents in his pocket and wanted to buy some bubble gum. When they had nearly reached the road, they saw a little girl lying under a fence in the shade, fast asleep, with 2 big baskets of grapes beside her. Waffy stood very still and looked at the grapes. David looked at the little girl. She was not sleeping peacefully at all. She was tossing and muttering, and as she turned over, he noticed that she was a hunchback, and her legs were too small for her body. Ragbag sniffed at her dubiously and lowered his ears sadly. Waffy looked around furtively, tiptoed up to the grapes, and stuffed a handful into his mouth. Then he broke off a bunch and tried to stuff it into David's mouth. We mustn't! It's stealing, said David, backing away. But Waffy had no patience with that sort of thing. You're a silly, frightened baby, he whispered scornfully. You were afraid of that boat. Now you're afraid of getting caught. If you are afraid of everything, go and play with your little sister, and I'll go and play with the big boys. They are not afraid of anything. Karam took a melon the other day, a great big ripe one, right from under a store window. David felt all in a muddle. He longed to be a brave, tough hero like Murray had been, but he was sure Murray would never have stolen anything. It would be dreadful if the boys would not play with him and he was left alone. Perhaps there were different ways of being brave, but until he could think it out, perhaps he had better take the grapes. He held out his hand. All right, he said gruffly, feeling very unhappy. Give me some. I'm not afraid any more than you are." "That little girl won't wake up," said Waffy. "She's sick. Look, she's tossing and talking in her sleep. Here, have some. They are nice, ripe, juicy ones." They squatted on the ground, tossing the juicy purple fruit into their mouths. Having once stolen, David thought he might as well go on. The grapes were very nice, and there were plenty of them, but he was wondering who could have left such a sick child alone under a fence. The flies were crawling on her eyes and lips, and she looked very uncomfortable indeed. But he was not left long in doubt. Ragbag suddenly leaped up and started barking, and a black-bearded man from the country appeared around the corner, followed by his wife, who carried a baby on her back. Waffy saw him in time. His life had been spent darting and dodging, and he did it now. He shot into the middle of the main road, almost between the man's legs, and after that, only a greyhound could have kept up with those scudding brown feet. But David had his back to the couple and had hardly realized what was happening before a horny hand had gripped him by the neck. "I'll get the police on you," said the man, screwing David's head around and aiming a well-directed kick at the little black dog who was barking so furiously. Then, seeing the frightened blue eyes, he realized that this was no child of his own race and became more cautious. "Who are you?" he asked gruffly. "The doctor's son," answered David, trembling all over. "I am very sorry. I only took a few." A gleam of interest came into the swarthy face. Still holding David firmly, he prodded the little girl with his foot. "Get up!" he shouted. The child, awake by now, only moaned and tried to lift her head, but it fell back against the turf. The woman looked sorry and crouched down beside her. "It's no good, my husband," she said. "The child cannot walk, and we cannot carry her and the grapes and the baby and the empty baskets. If you want to get back to the village tonight, you must leave her behind. They have shut the door at the hospital, and they will say we are too late. But if that is the doctor's son, send him to fetch his father to speak to us. When they see her, they will take her in. They are compassionate people." "I'll find my father," said David eagerly, only too glad for a chance of turning the man's attention away from himself. "Come with me, and I'll show the way." "Good," said the man, who was impatient to get home. "You, woman, stay here and guard the fruit. And you, boy, take me to your father, and I'll say nothing about the fruit. But if you fail me or deceive me, I'll call the police." He picked up the girl and followed David along the main road. Waffy was nowhere to be seen. The big hospital gates were closed, but David knew a way around. By hook or by crook, he must get in to his father. "Wait there," he said to the man, pointing to a low stone ledge by the gate. Then he hurried through the garden and slipped into his father's clinic through the back door. There was still a little crowd of people waiting to be seen, and Dad was going to be very late for dinner as it was. "Dad," said David, pushing through the group of patients and reaching the table where his father sat, "I've got a sick little girl for you." "Not the first," said his father, pausing a moment to look at him. David's shirt was wet and muddy, and his hair stood up in a cowlick, very fair above his brown forehead. His eyes were wide and very blue, and his snub nose covered with freckles. He was not really allowed in, but perhaps it was something important. "Where did you find her?" asked Dad, "and what's the matter with her?" "She's sick," said David, "much worse than all these people, and her father kicked her." "Very well," said Dad. "Bring her in, and I'll look at her." David darted away, and a few minutes later all three returned, the man determined to be rid of his burden as soon as possible. "She's nothing to do with me," he said, holding her out. "Her mother and father both died of typhoid fever last year, and it is a pity she did not die too. What place is there in the world for a hunchback child without parents? No one wanted her, but my wife feeds her, and she helps in return. Today she started out to market with us, carrying a basket of grapes, and she became sick on the way. I could not carry the grapes and pomegranates, so I left her to rest under the bamboo. When I came back after I bought a sack of grain, I found her like this. And how can we carry her and the grapes and the baby, as well as the grain and the baskets, back to the village? Besides, she is not ours, and we don't want a sick child in our home." He held out the little creature as though he would like to drop her. The doctor took her from him very gently and laid her on a couch. She lay very still now and did not seem to hear or care that no one wanted her. She might have been any age. Her twisted body was very small, but her face looked old and careworn. David felt a lump come into his throat as he looked at her, and he turned and ran out of the room. She was quite safe now. Dad and the nurses would look after her. Mother was looking for him as he ran down the path. "You're late, David," she said. "It's more than a quarter of an hour since I rang the bell." "I couldn't help it, Mother," he panted. "I had an adventure. I found a poor little girl with a lump on her back, and she's very sick. Nobody wants her, and the man kicked her, so I took her to Dad. Don't you think, Mother, when she's better she could come and live with us? Nobody else wants her." His mother smiled. "I'll go and see this little girl," she said. "I expect someone takes care of her. Wash your hands for dinner now. Is Dad nearly ready?" "No," said David. "There are still lots of people. We found a little tiny secret boat chained between two rocks. Do you think it might be smugglers?" "I expect it's a fishing boat," said Mother, tying on Joan's bib. "Come and sit down, David. We'd better not wait. Yes, Joan, I'm listening, but eat your soup first, and then tell me the rest." Joan was trying to tell a long story about a cat who had kittens behind the garbage cans, a rather unhealthy spot where children were not meant to go, but which had now become the center of attraction for all of them. David let her prattle on as he ate his dinner in silence. He felt very unhappy and lonely. Murray had gone, and they would not see him again for a whole year, which was almost as long as forever. There was that little girl lying so still, and nobody wanted her. Worst of all, he had stolen those grapes, and he could never tell anybody. Perhaps he would even have to go on stealing, because Woffy liked stealing and would call him a coward if he didn't, and would tell all the other boys. He suddenly pushed away his plate. "I'm not hungry," he said. "I think I feel sick." But as soon as he had said it, his father came in. "Well," said his father, "how did Murray get off? He'll be over France now." They went on talking about Murray, and Joan went on talking about the cat behind the garbage can, not minding much whether anyone was listening or not. David got up and leaned against his mother's shoulder, and no one thought it strange that he should be sad. We were all feeling sad because Murray had gone. "By the way," said his mother at last, "David was telling me about a little sick girl. What's the matter with her?" "I'm not sure yet," answered David's father. "She's been taken up to the wards, and I'll see her again after dinner. She's very ill and thin and neglected. I don't know if we can do much for her, and the sad part is that even if she does get better, she doesn't seem to belong to anyone. She's just a little servant girl." Waffy, rather sensibly, did not turn up after dinner, nor the next day until the evening, and David felt half relieved and half worried. He didn't like Waffy much. Waffy had not only stolen, but he had also run away and left David alone with the man. Yet life was pretty dull without him or Murray. None of Murray's other friends had been to pick him up, and Joan only wanted to play with dolls or visit the cat with the kittens. He had built himself a wigwam with bamboo sticks in the garden, but it wasn't much fun alone. And on the whole, when Waffy's sly little face peeped round the gate about sunset, David was not sorry, and was ready to let bygones be bygones. "I can't stay," said Waffy, who had not been invited to stay. "My father sent me to the store, and he'll be at me if I'm not back quickly. But this morning I went down to the beach early, and the little boat was gone. It didn't go in the daytime either, 'cause I watched from the top of the cliff all the afternoon and evening. It went away in the dark, David, without any lights." "How do you know?" asked David. "Weren't you asleep?" "Oh, I kept waking up and looking out of the window," said Waffy most untruthfully. "I told my father, and he said, 'Watch that little boat.' So, David, we must go every day, and tomorrow ask your mother if she'll take us up the mountain to cut fishing rods. If we go down and pretend to fish just around the corner, it will not look as if we were watching." David was impressed. This was real adventure, and his heart warmed to Waffy. "All right," he said, "I'll ask her. Come after breakfast tomorrow." "I'll come," said Waffy, and disappeared through the gate in a hurry. David sat in the entrance of his wigwam with Ragbag's head resting on his feet and looked out over the sea. Away to his left, where the coast jutted out into the ocean, the sky was aflame. Then the rosy clouds paled, and it began to grow dark. One bright star burned out over the headland. Just one. The darker the sky grew, the brighter it shone. Soon there would be others. If only Waffy was not such a bad boy, thought David. He did want to be good, but it was so hard being different, shining like sons of God, like lights in the world. He got up and went in. The dew was falling, and the long white flowers of the tobacco tree, which only smell in the dark, were already scenting the dusk. "Come along, David," said Mother. "It's bedtime. Get undressed, and don't forget to wash your knees. They're black." "All right," said David. "Then will you read me Murray's verse about shining like sons of God, and the inverse nation? I don't remember it." "Yes, we'll find it when you are ready for bed," said Mother. "Joan's nearly finished. Get into bed quickly, and I'll come." "What does it mean, Mother?" David asked, when she had read the verse to him, sitting on his bed. "It means," she said, "that you may be good and do right, being a son of God, and so like Jesus that no one can find fault with you, not even when you are with bad people, still shining like lights in a dark place." "But what's a son of God?" asked David. "You are our son, because you were born to us, and you share our life," answered his mother. "A son of God is someone who has received Jesus, God's Son, into his heart, and so shares the very life of God. There's a verse that says it, but as many as received him, meaning Jesus, to them he gave the power to become the sons of God. It's a wonderful thing to be a son of God, his very own child, sharing that beautiful, shining life of Jesus, which is like a candle shining in an empty lantern. It's the only way to be a light in the world." Mother waited quietly for a minute or two. David was butting his head against her shoulder, as he always did when he wanted to tell her something that was troubling him. But he wasn't ready yet, and he was very sleepy. So she said his prayers with him, kissed him, and tucked him in, and then she turned to look at the empty bed beside him. Murray would already have gone to bed in a strange new dormitory. He would be wearing his new blue-striped pajamas that he had chosen himself. "Mother," said a drowsy voice, "can you take us up the mountain in the morning to get fishing rods?" There was a little boat, and it sailed away in the dark without any lights. And, Mother, tomorrow I'd like to be a son of God. And David was asleep.